I am Riley, 32 years old, and the eternal outsider in my own family. After 3 years of minimal contact, I returned to my childhood home when my parents called about important family matters. I thought maybe, finally, they wanted to reconnect. Instead, I discovered the same pattern of exclusion that had defined my childhood, crystallized in a single moment when my father smirked and said, "Sorry, this room's for family only." But when they later asked me to co-sign their $290,000 mortgage loan, I stood up and said 4 words that changed everything. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and if you relate to family struggles, hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey of setting boundaries. Growing up in suburban Chicago, I always felt like I was living on the periphery of my own family. While my parents never said it outright, their actions spoke volumes. I was consistently the last one picked for family activities, assigned the smallest bedroom in our house, and often forgotten in family conversations. Meanwhile, my brother Marcus and sister Stephanie seemed to exist in a different reality within the same household. My parents' faces would light up whenever Marcus scored a goal in his soccer games. They'd cheer wildly from the sidelines, Dad jumping up and shouting encouragement, Mom recording every moment on her bulky camcorder. For Stephanie's dance recitals, they'd bring flowers and take her out for celebratory ice cream afterward. But when I won the regional science fair in 8th grade, beating out students from 20 other schools, my mother simply nodded and said, "That's nice, Riley," before turning the conversation back to Marcus's upcoming tournament. I threw myself into academics, hoping achievement might finally earn their attention. I graduated valedictorian, earned a full scholarship to a state university for computer science, and spent weekends coding instead of partying. Mom and Dad attended my high school graduation, of course, but left immediately after the ceremony for Marcus's baseball practice, missing the speech I'd worked on for weeks. College became my escape. For the first time, I could breathe without the constant reminder that I somehow didn't measure up. I took extra courses each semester, working part-time at the university IT department to cover living expenses, since my parents had made it clear that college costs were my responsibility. "You got that scholarship. You should be able to handle the rest," Dad had said, while simultaneously helping Stephanie finance a car for her 16th birthday. After graduation, despite struggling financially, I made the decision to move 4 states away. The distance wasn't just physical but emotional, a necessary boundary that allowed me to start building my own life. Those early years weren't easy. My first apartment had water damage and noisy neighbors. When the ceiling started leaking one winter, I called home in desperation, asking to borrow $500 for repairs until my next paycheck. "We're a little tight right now," Mom had said. "We just helped Marcus with the down payment on his house. Maybe you should have chosen a more practical career path." I never asked again after that. Instead, I worked overtime, took freelance coding projects on weekends, and slowly climbed the corporate ladder. 8 years of dedication resulted in my current position as senior software engineer at a respected tech company. The promotion 6 months ago finally brought the financial stability I'd been working toward for years. Then, 3 weeks ago, the unexpected happened. My phone rang with my mother's name on the screen, a rare occurrence these days as our communication had dwindled to obligatory holiday texts and occasional email updates. "Riley," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of controlled pleasantness. "We need you to come home. There are important family matters we need to discuss in person." Something in her voice triggered hope within me, that dangerous emotion I thought I'd finally outgrown. Maybe my success had finally registered with them. Maybe they were ready to acknowledge me as an equal member of the family. Maybe, after all these years, they actually missed me. "I'll check my calendar," I said, already mentally rearranging meetings and projects. 3 days later, I was driving through my old neighborhood, noting the changes and constants. The Johnson's maple tree had grown massive. The corner store had been replaced by a coffee shop, but my parents' house looked eerily the same from the outside, right down to the slightly crooked mailbox I had accidentally backed into when learning to drive. The greeting was awkward. stilted with forced smiles and superficial questions about my drive. Mom had aged more than I expected. New lines around her eyes, her hair fully gray now. Dad looked much the same, perhaps a bit heavier around the middle, still carrying himself with that air of authority that had intimidated me as a child. "You look well," Mom said, giving me a quick, loose hug. "Professional. The guest room is all set up for you," Dad added, taking my bag before I could protest and heading upstairs. That first night, dinner conversation revolved entirely around Marcus's new position at his law firm and Stephanie's engagement to a dentist they clearly approved of. I answered questions about my job with brief responses, noticing how quickly attention shifted away whenever I spoke. Some patterns never change. "We've done some renovations since you were here last," Mom mentioned as she served dessert, a store-bought apple pie that had always been my favorite, though I doubted she remembered that detail. I noticed. "The kitchen looks different," I ventured. "Oh, that's just the beginning," Dad said with unusual animation. "We've done some special updates." When I asked for details, the subject changed abruptly to the neighbor's new landscaping. As I helped clear the dishes, I wondered what exactly these important family matters could be, and why the strange secrecy about home renovations. That night, lying in the guest bed surrounded by furniture I recognized from my old bedroom, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if coming back had been a mistake. The familiar feeling of being an intruder in my own family had returned within hours, settling back around my shoulders like a well-worn but uncomfortable sweater. The next morning, I woke early, a habit formed from years of setting my alarm before sunrise to maximize productivity. The house was quiet, my parents still asleep. I took the opportunity to explore, coffee mug in hand, curious about the renovations my father had mentioned so proudly yet vaguely the night before. The kitchen had indeed been updated with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, a far cry from the laminate and white enamel I remembered from childhood. The living room furniture was new, leather instead of the fabric sectional where I'd spent countless hours reading while my siblings watched TV. Family photos lined the mantel, mostly recent ones featuring Marcus and Stephanie at various life milestones. I appeared in only one, a group shot from Stephanie's college graduation 5 years ago. As I continued my self-guided tour, I noticed something odd. Near the kitchen, where a small pantry had once been, was a new door I didn't recognize. Unlike the other doors in the house, this one was heavy oak, with what appeared to be a digital keypad lock installed. Curious, I approached and examined the sophisticated security feature, wondering what could possibly warrant such protection in a suburban home. As I stood there, I heard voices from inside, muffled but animated. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone suggested excitement. I raised my hand, about to knock, when my father's voice came from behind me. "Looking for something?" His tone was casual, but his expression told a different story. "Just exploring the changes," I said, gesturing to the door. "What's this room?" My father's lips curved into that familiar smirk I'd seen countless times growing up, usually when he was about to deliver some minor disappointment. "Oh, that's our special project. Sorry, this room's for family only." He patted my shoulder and pointed toward a tiny storage space near the refrigerator. "You can put your things in there if you need to." The words hit me like a physical blow, though I maintained my neutral expression through years of practice. For family only. As if I weren't family. As if being their son was somehow insufficient to grant access to a room in their house. "I see," I managed, taking a sip of coffee to hide whatever emotions might be visible on my face. "Don't look so serious," Dad said with a short laugh. "It's just a little joke. The room's not finished yet, that's all." But it wasn't a joke, and we both knew it. The keypad, the voices inside, his dismissive gesture toward the storage space, all of it painted a clear picture. Whatever was behind that door was deliberately being kept from me. As Dad turned away to pour his own coffee, the memory surfaced unbidden. I was 12 years old at the annual family reunion, watching as cousins were invited into Grandpa's study to see his collection of war memorabilia. When my turn came, Uncle Robert had glanced at my father, who shook his head slightly. "Maybe next year, Riley," Uncle Robert had said. Next year never came. I retreated to the guest room, which I now realized contained the old furniture from my childhood bedroom, items I had assumed they'd donated or sold years ago. The twin bed with its plain blue comforter, the wooden desk with the scratch from when Marcus had thrown my science project across the room in a fit of jealousy, the bookshelf that had once held my collection of science fiction novels. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas, my best friend since college, and probably the person who knew me better than anyone in my biological family. "How's the homecoming going?" he asked. I stared at the screen for a long moment before responding honestly. About as expected. Already been reminded of my outsider status. His reply came quickly. "You don't need to stay. You know that, right? You're an adult, with your own life." He was right, of course. There was nothing keeping me here beyond a vague sense of obligation and that persistent, foolish hope that something might be different this time. I could pack my bag, get in my car, and be back in my apartment by evening. But something kept me rooted. Perhaps it was simple curiosity about these important family matters, or maybe it was the stubborn part of me that still craved acceptance from the people who should have offered it unconditionally from the beginning. "I'll stay a few days," I texted back. "See what they wanted to discuss. Your choice. Call if you need to vent." I unpacked my suitcase, arranging clothes in the small dresser that still had a Pokemon sticker on one drawer from my childhood phase. At the bottom of the bag, I found a folded piece of paper I didn't remember packing. Unfolding it revealed a crayon drawing from when I was perhaps 6 or 7 years old, stick figures of 4 people holding hands, labeled in childish scrawl, "Mom, Dad, me, baby," which would have been Stephanie, the youngest. I didn't remember drawing it, had no idea how it had ended up in my possession. The simple image of familial unity, created before I fully understood my place in the hierarchy, made my chest tight with an emotion I couldn't name. Placing the drawing on the nightstand, I made a decision. If connection was what I wanted, perhaps I needed to be the one to initiate it. That evening, I would cook dinner for everyone, using the culinary skills I'd developed living on my own. Maybe shared food could bridge what words seemed unable to. The dinner I prepared might as well have been served to strangers for all the connection it fostered. My parents ate with polite comments about the interesting flavors, while conversation centered on topics that subtly excluded me: family investments I knew nothing about, neighbors I no longer recognized, inside jokes I wasn't privy to. The real blow came the following evening, when extended family arrived for what my mother called just a casual get-together, but turned out to be a full family gathering. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years filed through the front door, offering surprised greetings as if I were an unexpected ghost at my own family reunion. "Riley! Goodness, we thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth," Aunt Patricia exclaimed, her hug lasting barely a second before she moved on to gush over Stephanie's engagement ring. Throughout the evening, I watched as various family members freely entered the mysterious room near the kitchen, punching codes into the keypad with casual familiarity. Each time the door opened, I caught glimpses of plush seating and what appeared to be an elaborate entertainment system. The easy access everyone else enjoyed only highlighted my exclusion. During a moment when I thought no one was watching, I observed my brother Marcus approach the door, press 6 digits on the keypad, and slip inside. Minutes later, Stephanie did the same, using what appeared to be a different code entirely. They had access, just not me. As I helped myself to another drink from the kitchen counter, I overheard my mother's voice from nearby, leading what sounded like a tour. "We converted the old storage area completely," she was saying to Uncle Jack and his wife. "Custom cabinetry, top-of-the-line sound system. We only share access with real family, those who've proven their commitment." The deliberate emphasis on real family sent a cold sensation down my spine. I set my glass down harder than intended, drawing their attention as I turned to face them. "Riley," Uncle Jack nodded. looking uncomfortable. Your mom was just showing us the new entertainment room. Quite impressive. So I've heard, I replied evenly. Though I haven't seen it myself. An awkward silence followed, broken by my mother's thin laugh. Oh, Riley just got here. We haven't had time for the full tour. She quickly guided Uncle Jack and his wife toward the living room, leaving me alone in the kitchen. Later, I attempted to join a conversation about the family investment group, something I'd never heard mentioned before despite my financial background. When did this start? I asked my cousin Daniel, who worked in banking. About 3 years ago, he replied, looking surprised. After Grandma's inheritance was distributed, I assumed you weren't interested since you moved away. Everyone else pitched in. I was never told about it, I said quietly. Daniel's expression shifted to discomfort. Oh, I just assumed. Since Marcus handles all the paperwork. I excused myself and wandered to the hallway where family photos covered the walls. Examining them closely revealed a pattern I'd never consciously registered before. In nearly every group shot, I was positioned at the edge, physically separated from the core family unit, sometimes by just inches, but the positioning was consistent enough to seem deliberate rather than coincidental. On a side table sat albums I remembered from childhood. Flipping through one, I searched for photos from my high school graduation. The entire event occupied a single page with 3 photos, none showing the moment I received my valedictorian medal. In contrast, Marcus's graduation spread across 6 pages, documenting everything from the ceremony to the party afterward. Stephanie's took up 8, including professional portraits my parents had commissioned. That evening, I found my mother alone in the kitchen and decided to gently address the issue. Mom, I noticed the new room seems to be open to everyone but me. I can't help feeling excluded. She busied herself with wiping already clean countertops. Don't be so sensitive, Riley. You've always been independent, never wanting family involvement. We respect that. That's not true, I countered, keeping my voice level. I've always wanted to be included. You and Dad just never seemed to want me around. That's ridiculous, she dismissed without looking at me. You chose to move away, to rarely visit. The others stayed connected, because they were welcomed, I said softly. I don't have time for this victim narrative, she snapped, finally meeting my eyes. If you wanted to be included, you should have made an effort. The conversation ended there, my mother walking away as she had countless times before when confronted with anything resembling emotional honesty. I found Stephanie in the backyard, smoking a cigarette she quickly tried to hide when she saw me. Don't worry, I assured her. I'm not going to tell. She exhaled smoke with a nervous laugh. Old habits. Engagement stress. Can I ask you something? I leaned against the railing beside her. This family room situation. Does it seem strange to you that I'm the only one excluded? Stephanie's expression softened momentarily. It's just Dad being Dad, you know. He has his favorites. Her eyes widened as she realized what she'd admitted. I didn't mean, it's okay, I said. I've always known. She seemed about to say something more, perhaps something honest, but the sliding door opened behind us. There you are, Steph, Marcus called out. Dad's showing everyone the new sound system. She gave me an apologetic glance before following our brother inside, leaving me alone in the growing darkness. Later that night, passing my parents' room, I overheard a fragment of conversation that confirmed my suspicions. Perfect timing with Riley's new position, my father was saying. His financial situation has finally stabilized. Do you think he'll agree? My mother asked. He's always been difficult. He'll come around, Dad replied confidently. Family obligation is a powerful motivator. I returned to the guest room, the pieces starting to align into a picture I didn't want to see. This visit wasn't about reconnection. It was about something else entirely, something connected to my recently improved financial situation. The important family matters had nothing to do with emotional bonds and everything to do with money. A week into my visit, with tension building daily beneath forced pleasantries, my parents announced a special family dinner. We want everyone together tonight, Mom declared over breakfast. We have something important to discuss." To my surprise, when evening arrived, my father approached me directly. "Riley, we'd like you to join us in the family room for dinner." After days of exclusion, the sudden invitation triggered warning bells rather than gratitude. Nevertheless, I followed him to the mysterious door, watching as he entered a code and ushered me inside with an uncharacteristic flourish. The room beyond exceeded my expectations. What had once been a modest storage space had been transformed into an elaborate entertainment zone with theater-style recliners arranged before an enormous television screen. A fully stocked bar occupied one corner, while a gaming setup that would make professional streamers envious filled another. The lighting was recessed and adjustable, currently set to a warm glow that highlighted the custom woodwork throughout. Most telling were the walls, covered with family photographs spanning decades. Unlike the hallway display, these were arranged in careful chronological order, documenting birthdays, vacations, graduations, and holidays. I appeared in perhaps 1 in 10 images, always peripheral, while my siblings dominated the visual narrative of our family history. "Impressive," I said, working to keep my tone neutral as I surveyed what must have cost tens of thousands of dollars. "Top of the line everything," Dad boasted, pointing out features with obvious pride. The audio system alone was $12,000, but worth every penny. The seating is Italian leather, custom ordered. Dinner was served at a table I didn't recognize, clearly new and expensive, with place settings that matched the formal dining ware my mother had always kept for special occasions, only throughout my childhood. The meal itself was catered rather than homemade, another unusual touch that heightened my sense that something significant was unfolding. After dessert was cleared away, my father cleared his throat and stood, adopting what I recognized as his business presentation stance from the few times I'd seen him speak at community events. "We've called this family meeting because we have an important opportunity to discuss," he began, making eye contact with everyone except me. "As you know, we've made significant improvements to our home over the past 2 years. What you might not know is that these renovations are part of a larger financial strategy." He clicked a remote, and a spreadsheet appeared on the massive television screen, displaying what looked like mortgage calculations and investment projections. "We've been advised to refinance the house to free up capital for our investment group. Interest rates are favorable right now, and with the increased property value from our improvements, we can access substantial equity." The presentation continued for nearly 20 minutes, filled with financial terminology. I understood perfectly well given my own investment experience, though my parents seemed to be explaining it as if I were financially illiterate. They outlined plans for using home equity to fund various ventures, speaking with an authority that seemed at odds with the questionable financial decisions I'd observed throughout my life. Finally, my father reached what was clearly the purpose of the entire week's charade. "The bank requires an additional co-signer due to some recent credit issues," he announced, his gaze finally landing directly on me. "We need someone with excellent credit and stable income to secure the loan." "How much?" I asked, though I already knew from the figures on screen. $290,000, he replied as casually as if discussing lunch plans. "Marcus and Stephanie have already agreed to be part of this, but their financial profiles aren't quite strong enough on their own." My mother leaned forward, placing her hand on mine in a rare gesture of physical affection that now felt calculated rather than warm. "This is finally a chance for you to contribute to the family, Riley. To be part of something important we're building together." "What your mother means," Dad added, "is that this is what real family members do for each other. They step up when needed." The audacity was breathtaking. My mind flashed back to my junior year of college when my ancient laptop died during finals week. I'd called home, explaining that I needed $800 for a replacement that would get me through my programming classes. "You should have budgeted better," Dad had lectured. "Financial planning is part of becoming an adult." I remembered the tooth infection 3 years ago that required emergency dental work costing $3,000 I didn't have at the time. My parents' response to my reluctant request for help: "We're not in a position to bail you out every time you have a crisis." And my first apartment after college, when I needed a co-signer because I had limited credit history despite working throughout school. "We don't believe in co-signing loans," my father had stated firmly. "It creates unhealthy dependencies." Now they sat before me, expecting my signature on a loan 30 times larger than any help I had ever requested from them. Speaking of family obligation, as if it were a concept they'd honored rather than weaponized throughout my life, I became aware of physical symptoms, manifesting from the emotional turmoil within me: a slight tremor in my hands, elevated heart rate, the sensation of blood rushing in my ears. Yet outwardly, I maintained the composed facade I'd perfected through years of similar moments. "The paperwork is ready," my father continued, clearly interpreting my silence as consideration rather than the profound reckoning it actually was. "We just need your signature, and we can move forward as a family." My siblings shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus avoided eye contact entirely, suddenly fascinated by his water glass. Stephanie, however, glanced at me with what might have been understanding, perhaps even a silent apology, before looking away. In that moment, with perfect clarity, I saw the pattern of my entire relationship with my family not as a cherished member, but as a resource to be tapped when convenient and dismissed when not. I had been invited back not for who I was, but for what I could provide. The realization was both painful and, strangely, liberating. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, sleep impossible, as my mind processed decades of subtle rejection crystallized in this latest manipulation. Memories surfaced with new context. The summer my parents sent Marcus to an expensive baseball camp while I received a second-hand chemistry set. The Christmas Stephanie got her first car while I unwrapped gas station gift cards. The family vacation planned during my final exams, making my participation impossible. Financial inequity had always been the most tangible expression of my parents' preferences. It wasn't about the money itself, but what it represented: the concrete measurement of how much they valued each child's happiness and potential. Morning arrived with heavy silence and dark circles under my eyes. At breakfast, my mother immediately placed loan paperwork beside my coffee cup. "We'd like to move forward today if possible," she said, her tone suggesting this was a mere formality rather than a life-altering commitment. "The mortgage officer can meet us this afternoon. Signing this would really show you're finally ready to be part of this family," she added, the passive-aggressive implication hanging in the air between us. After all these years of keeping yourself separate, my father joined us, carrying his own coffee and a business card. "Here's the contact information for the loan officer. I told him you'd call today to set everything up." The presumption was staggering. I took a slow sip of coffee, looking between their expectant faces. For once, I didn't rush to fill the uncomfortable silence with reassurances or deflections. Instead, I allowed myself to truly assess what was happening, as pressure mounted visibly in my father's tightening jaw and my mother's increasingly rapid tapping of her fingernail against her mug. Finally, I stood up, pushing my chair back deliberately. The scrape of wood against tile floor seemed to echo in the tense kitchen. "Not my house," I said quietly but firmly. The room fell silent. My mother's finger froze mid-tap. My father's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. "What did you say?" he asked, his tone suggesting he must have misheard rather than faced outright refusal. "Not my house," I repeated, my voice stronger. "Not my renovation. Not my investment. Not my responsibility." "Riley, be reasonable," my mother began, but I raised my hand slightly, and to my surprise, she actually stopped speaking. "I've been reasonable my entire life," I continued, maintaining a calm I didn't know I possessed. "I've accepted being the last one considered, the first one forgotten. I've pretended not to notice when opportunities were given to Marcus and Stephanie that were explicitly denied to me. I've made excuses for why family photos barely include me, why family resources were never available when I needed them, but always abundant for my siblings." "That's not true," my father interjected, his face flushing. "We've always treated all our children equally." "Have we?" my mother asked unexpectedly, her eyes widening, as if the question had escaped without permission. "When I was 16, I continued, and wanted to attend the coding camp that could have jump-started my career. You said extracurriculars were luxuries we couldn't afford. 2 weeks later, you paid for Marcus's trip to Europe with his soccer team. That was different, Dad dismissed. That was, when I needed help with college expenses, you told me loans were part of growing up. Stephanie's education was fully funded, including an apartment off campus. Your sister's situation was, when I graduated with honors and landed my first job, you couldn't attend the ceremony because Marcus had a golf tournament that weekend. Now you're just being petty, my father snapped. Ancient history has nothing to do with the current situation. It has everything to do with it, I countered. You've spent my entire life making it clear that I'm not really family, just an obligation you fulfilled with minimum effort. The locked room is just a physical manifestation of what's always been true. I'm on the outside, allowed in only when you need something from me. My mother's eyes filled with tears, a response I'd seen before when confronted with uncomfortable truths. How can you say such hurtful things? After all we've done for you? What exactly have you done? I asked gently. Name one time you supported my goals or celebrated my achievements without immediately shifting attention to Marcus or Stephanie. Her silence was answer enough. Marcus chose that moment to enter the kitchen, clearly having overheard at least part of the conversation. You've always been jealous, he accused, falling into his familiar role as my parents' defender. Always thinking you deserve special treatment because you're smart. News flash. The world doesn't revolve around you. This isn't about jealousy, I replied evenly. It's about reciprocity, about the fundamental imbalance that's defined our family dynamic. So you're refusing to help the family because of some perceived childhood slights? My father demanded, voice rising. This is exactly the selfish behavior we've come to expect from you. I noticed Stephanie standing in the doorway, silent but watching intently. When our eyes met, she gave a nearly imperceptible nod that felt strangely like permission, or perhaps validation. I'm refusing to sign a mortgage for a house where I've never been welcome, to fund renovations I wasn't consulted on, for the benefit of people who have consistently demonstrated they don't value me as an equal family member, I clarified. That's not selfishness, it's self-respect. If that's your attitude, my father said coldly, perhaps you should reconsider your place in this family. The threat hung in the air, familiar in its implication yet never before stated so explicitly. The ultimate leverage they believed they held access to family connection dangled as the consequence for non-compliance. A place in the family shouldn't be contingent on financial transactions, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice despite the emotion behind it. Real family doesn't require monetary proof of loyalty. Real family doesn't lock certain members out while welcoming others in. Real family doesn't weaponize belonging. My mother stood abruptly. If you walk away from this, Riley, you're making a choice about your future with us. No, I corrected gently. I'm acknowledging the choice you've already made throughout my past. I turned and walked upstairs to the guest room, the sound of my father's angry voice fading behind me. There was a strange calm in finally naming the dynamic that had shaped my life, in refusing to participate in the fiction of equal belonging. Packing took less than 10 minutes, my belongings barely unpacked from arrival. As I zipped my suitcase closed, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. The sharp sting of final rejection, yes, but also an unexpected sense of relief, of burdens long carried finally set down. When I carried my bag downstairs, only Stephanie stood in the hallway, arms crossed protectively across her chest. You're really leaving? Yes, I said simply. She nodded, looking both sad and understanding. For what it's worth, I think you're right, about all of it. I offered a small smile. Take care of yourself, Steph. My parents were nowhere to be seen as I loaded my suitcase into my car and pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind not just the house, but the persistent hope that had kept me tethered to a family system that had never truly included me. The drive home felt symbolic, passing through neighborhoods where I'd grown up, past the school where I'd excelled but rarely been celebrated, by the park where family picnics had often devolved into spotlight sessions for my siblings' latest accomplishments. Each familiar landmark receded in my rearview mirror, physical distance gradually matching the emotional separation I'd finally acknowledged. Arriving at my apartment 8 hours later, I was struck by the contrast. My space wasn't large or lavish, certainly nothing like my parents' showcase home with its specialized entertainment room, but every element reflected authentic choice rather than performance. The bookshelves filled with titles that had shaped my thinking, the comfortable if somewhat worn sofa where friends gathered for movie nights, the desk where I'd built my career through persistence rather than privilege. For the first time, I saw my modest home not as lacking compared to my parents' house, but as genuine, in a way their space had never been. The week that followed brought the expected barrage of manipulation. Text messages from my mother vacillated between guilt trips. "I can't believe you would abandon your family when we needed you," and minimization. "You always were too sensitive." My father's approach was more direct, with voicemails gradually escalating from stern disappointment to thinly veiled threats about family inheritance and legacy. Marcus proved himself the perfect proxy, sending screenshots of the family group chat where I was being portrayed as ungrateful and selfish, messages clearly meant to make me question my decision and crawl back with apologies. What none of them seemed to understand was that their reactions only confirmed the dysfunctional dynamic I'd finally named and rejected. Support came from unexpected quarters. Thomas invited me for dinner, listening without judgment as I recounted the entire experience. "I've watched this pattern for years," he said finally. "I'm proud of you for breaking it." Even colleagues noticed the change in me, with my team lead commenting on my more confident contributions in meetings. "Whatever weight you dropped, it looks good on you," she remarked after I successfully presented a major project proposal. The real surprise came 2 weeks after my departure, when Stephanie appeared at my door unannounced, fidgeting nervously with her engagement ring. "I probably should have called first," she said when I opened the door. Probably, I agreed, but stepped aside to let her in. She perched awkwardly on the edge of my sofa, declining coffee or water, clearly building toward something difficult. "I need to tell you something," she finally began. "About Mom and Dad, and the loan, and everything." Over the next hour, Stephanie revealed what I'd suspected but never confirmed. Our parents had systematically mismanaged money for years, living beyond their means while projecting financial stability to the extended family and community. The recent credit issues my father had mentioned were actually a pattern of defaulted loans and maxed credit cards, hidden from everyone except Marcus, who had been helping conceal their financial problems. "The special room?" I asked. "Built with money from Grandma's inheritance," Stephanie confirmed, her voice tight. "Money that was supposed to be split 4 ways, including you. They told everyone you'd received your share directly." "I never saw a penny," I said quietly. "I know. I found the paperwork last year. They forged your signature on the distribution documents." The revelation should have been shocking, but somehow it felt like the logical extension of what I'd already understood. The exclusion hadn't just been emotional but financial, a literal theft of resources that should have been mine by right. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Stephanie looked down at her hands. "Because when you stood up to them, it was the first time I'd ever seen anyone in the family set a boundary. It made me question everything." She paused. "And because I'm tired of being complicit in how they've treated you." That conversation marked the beginning of a different relationship with my sister. We established a regular coffee meeting every other Sunday, intentionally scheduled away from our parents' knowledge or influence. Gradually, Stephanie shared more about her own struggles with our parents' expectations and manipulations, different from mine, but damaging in their own way. Meanwhile, I sought professional help to process decades of family scapegoating. My therapist introduced concepts that gave language to experiences I'd felt but never named: emotional manipulation, financial abuse, golden child divided by scapegoat dynamics, triangulation. Understanding these patterns, intellectually, helped diminish their emotional power. "Family systems resist change," she explained during one session. "When you refuse to play your assigned role, everyone else has to adjust or work harder to pull you back in. That's what you're experiencing with the increased pressure. The knowledge allowed me to view the continuing messages from my parents with clinical detachment rather than renewed pain. I established clear boundaries: email communication only. No financial discussions. Limited personal information shared. 3 months after my departure, I received an anonymous message through social media from a younger cousin. I saw how they treated you at the gathering. They do the same to me. Can we talk? Suddenly, the pattern revealed itself more broadly. I began connecting with other outsider relatives. An uncle who'd been ostracized for marrying someone the family disapproved of. A cousin whose career choice had been deemed unacceptable. Another who'd questioned the family's political orthodoxy. We formed our own communication channel, offering support and validation to counterbalance the main family narrative. With the holiday season approaching, I made a conscious decision to create new traditions. Rather than subjecting myself to another performance of family togetherness where I'd inevitably be marginalized, I invited friends and outsider relatives for a Thanksgiving gathering at my apartment. Bring whoever makes you feel seen and valued, the invitation read. No performances required. The day before the event, a letter arrived from my father, not an email, but a formal envelope with the family return address stamped in the corner. Inside, expensive stationery carried a message that managed to be both conciliatory and threatening. Riley, your mother and I have discussed your behavior at length. While we feel you misinterpreted many aspects of your upbringing, we are willing to move forward if you reconsider your position on the family investment opportunity. The family legacy is at stake, and your participation remains important despite recent disagreements. Please respond promptly as financial deadlines approach. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a slightly repackaged version of the same demand. I wrote a brief response. I'm open to rebuilding our relationship through family counseling, if you're interested. Financial entanglements will not be part of that process. Wishing you well, Riley. The reply never came. 6 months after the confrontation in my parents' kitchen, my life had transformed in ways both tangible and intangible. A promotion at work brought new responsibilities and a significant salary increase, allowing me to move to a larger apartment in a neighborhood I'd always admired. Unlike my parents' showcase home, my new space prioritized comfort and function over impression management. With one meaningful exception, I created a dedicated guest room with a comfortable full-size bed, quality linens, and a welcome basket for visitors. On the door, I hung a small hand-painted sign reading, "Welcome to all who respect boundaries," a private joke that made me smile each time I passed it. The room had already hosted Stephanie twice during her increasingly frequent visits away from family oversight, as well as 2 younger cousins navigating their own complicated relationships with our shared relatives. My relationship with my parents evolved into something controlled and limited, but no longer harmful. I maintained contact through occasional emails, brief and informative rather than emotional. I declined their Christmas invitation with a simple, "I have other plans this year, but wish you a happy holiday season." No explanations, no justifications, no openings for manipulation. To my surprise, this clear boundary setting gradually shifted the dynamic. My father's demanding tone softened somewhat in his messages, while my mother occasionally asked questions that suggested genuine interest in my life rather than ammunition gathering. I remained cautious, but acknowledged the small changes with measured responses. Therapy continued to provide valuable insights about family systems and healing. Forgiveness doesn't mean resuming the same relationship, my therapist emphasized during a particularly productive session. It means freeing yourself from the expectation that people will be different than they've consistently shown themselves to be. This perspective helped me process the complicated grief of losing the family I had wished for while accepting the reality of the family I actually had. The anger that had initially fueled my boundary setting gradually transformed into something calmer and more sustainable, not indifference, but a clear-eyed acceptance that allowed me to engage on my own terms rather than theirs. Stephanie's growth paralleled my own in many ways. After our initial honest conversation, she began questioning other family patterns, establishing her own boundaries with increasing confidence. She postponed her wedding, much to our parents' dismay, explaining that she needed time to figure out who I am apart from family expectations. We never explicitly discussed whether my stand had influenced her decision, but the timing suggested a connection. The family system itself showed signs of reluctant evolution. Holiday gatherings became less mandatory, with various members feeling empowered to decline without the previous level of guilt or consequences. My parents' authority over extended family decisions seemed diminished, with others occasionally questioning dictates that had previously gone unchallenged. "Uncle Robert asked why you weren't at Easter dinner," Stephanie reported during one of our coffee meetings. "When Dad gave some vague answer about your busy schedule, Uncle Robert said he'd call you directly to catch up." Dad looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. As the next Thanksgiving approached, my parents extended what appeared to be a genuine invitation rather than a summons, acknowledging my choice to decline the previous year without criticism. I considered it briefly before politely declining again, choosing instead to host my now traditional gathering of chosen family. "Maybe next year," I added to my response, leaving a door slightly ajar without obligation. The preparation for my alternative celebration brought unexpected joy, from planning a menu that incorporated everyone's favorite dishes to arranging my space for maximum comfort rather than impression. Stephanie requested permission to join after making an appearance at our parents' dinner, a bridge between worlds that felt right for where we both were in our journeys. The night before the gathering, Thomas called to confirm details and ended our conversation with an observation that stopped me in my tracks. "You know what I just realized? It's been almost exactly a year since that visit to your parents. You're barely recognizable from the person who was agonizing about whether to go." He was right. The transformation wasn't just in circumstance, but in fundamental self-perception. I no longer defined myself primarily in relation to family approval or its absence. The painful clarity of that confrontation had ultimately been the catalyst for building a life centered on authentic connection rather than obligatory ties. As I added the final touches to my apartment that evening, I paused before the wall where I'd hung my own collection of photographs. Unlike the carefully curated display in my parents' family-only room, mine told a different story: friendships that had sustained me through difficult times, professional achievements, captured in casual snapshots rather than formal portraits, moments of genuine joy, with Stephanie and the cousins who'd formed our alternative family branch. Notably absent were any images that included my parents, not from spite, but from the simple truth that no such authentic moments existed to display. The healing wasn't complete, perhaps it never would be entirely. The child who drew stick figures of a united family still existed within me, but now accompanied by an adult who understood that belonging couldn't be earned through achievement or compliance, only freely given or wrongfully withheld. The pain of that withholding remained real, but it no longer defined my worth or possibilities. In choosing not my house that day in my parents' kitchen, I had begun building something far more valuable, a life where I was not merely tolerated at the margins, but centered in my own story, surrounded by people who didn't require performance for acceptance. True belonging, I'd discovered, wasn't about fighting harder for inclusion in spaces designed to exclude you. It was about recognizing your inherent worthiness and creating spaces that honored rather than diminished that worth. The journey wasn't linear or simple, but it was undeniably mine, built on foundations far more solid than my parents' showcased but hollow home. I wonder how many of you have experienced similar family dynamics. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with people who should have offered unconditional support? Share your story in the comments, and if this resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button to join this community of people building healthier relationships. Your experiences might help someone else find the courage to say "not my house" to situations that diminish their worth. Thank you for listening. And remember, the family you create through genuine connection often proves stronger than the one you're born into.